りおしまい。
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Get the Mic, the only show where your host on the left, Owl,
And your host on the right, Brock.
dissect fiction for its mythological significance. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Dragon Ball as usual, and in particular, episode 102, which is called Enter King Piccolo in the English, and in the Japanese, it's called The Death of Krillin, A Terrible Plot. And so, before we get started, though, if you like what you hear, give us a like. We would appreciate it, and subscribe to the channel. We've noticed a lot of you are not subscribed that watch because we get quite a few views these days. So be on the lookout for our new uploads as well. Mondays and Thursdays to YouTube, Tuesdays and Fridays to Rumble. We'd love a subscribe over there as well. I think without further ado, though, we can go ahead and get into the episode. So this is episode 102, Enter King Piccolo. And the first thing we see is the crew arrives to find Goku cradling Krillin's dead body. Cradling Krillin. There we go. The announcer tells everyone that a monster flew in and killed Krillin, taking the Dragon Ball and the tournament roster. Goku asks Bulma for the Dragon Radar and dashes toward the exit, ignoring Roshi's order to wait. As Goku sprints away, he remembers his memories with Krillin, shedding a tear. Roshi comments that Goku was a fool, as he hasn't regained his strength enough to fight something that could kill Krillin. And so now we can really get into the death of Krillin here and why Krillin really has to Krillin has to die at this point to launch off the rest of the story. But I'll go ahead and let you say some words.
Yeah, I think this is really where we sort of get introduced to this idea that it's similar to an ego death for Goku. He's just lost the tournament, right? And so there is this moment here where, one, we have pointed out that the tournament now is representative of the world that they live in, and two, this idea that with Roshi having stepped down, there is a responsibility for being at the top of the hierarchy of the world stage. And so with Goku having lost the fight to be the person who is the representative of that, it is an ego death in a sense. And so I've always kind of made that connection with Krillin, where he is this, he comes from the fact that Goku has subordinated himself to Roshi in the first place. And it's sort of this status that he has with him. And it's a piece of Roshi that he carries with him, where it's like he identifies with, or he projects a personality out of. And so to lose that, he has to regain an identity outside of Roshi, ultimately.
Or even to say, let's say this, like Goku's best friend and ally is the physical manifestation of his reverence and nourishment gained by the interaction with the spiritual father.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
A tie to that spiritual father as far as he can identify it, right?
And why that's his best friend or greatest ally, right? It's not because it's the strongest force, but it is the mechanism by which Goku can orient himself in the world when he's presented with things that are unknown. And so here the world is kind of, and we see it too. I love the art style of the actual animation, because like we're in this kind of twilight zone, right? And it's like the world, one era of the world is setting
The
and
sun
new
is setting on
is
this
dawning.
era, yeah.
And it's exactly what you said. It's the abdication of the father. Stepping down is really the first domino to fall, but only because, when we'll see at the end of the episode how Piccolo comes to be around. I already said Piccolo. But right here, we also have to mention Goku's immediate design. So this is something which I would also say is another piece of evidence that Goku is capable of malice. He definitely wants to kill the monster that killed Krillin. He wants revenge, right?
We see in the way that he's gritting his teeth, he ignores Roshi trying to temper his anger, right?
And like we were just saying, his greatest friend being his reverence and nourishment from the spiritual father is something that in his anger he rejects.
So here's the thing. We talked about whether or not the spiritual father was going to be able to cash that check to nourish Goku.
Oh yes,
and we've seen now that he cannot. And this is a fallout of this whole sort of cosmic situation that they found themselves in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is that it's not a check that Roshi can cash anymore. And so there's a resetting of the world. There's a setting of the sun.
But what is that
We're
check
going
you
into
say?
the unknown,
What is that
right?
check you're saying?
Sorry?
What is that check?
That check being whether or not he can pay for the food that would nourish Goku for his journey out into the world prior to this tournament, right?
Right.
For all the wisdom that he's taken on, is that something that
so you're saying
that Roshi can still support, right? Can
so
his
you're
mode of
saying
being
that's like the
incorporate all of that?
cosmogonic mechanism which sets it off as him not being able to
Yes.
nourish the hero.
That's what makes the hero transcend sort of that spiritual father and step into the higher stakes, let's say,
I
that
see
the
what you're
world
saying.
becomes, right? And so this is that transition and that setting of the sun, right? Where Goku, we see that ultimately Goku has learned more from his time in the world than he could have learned from Roshi, and Roshi is now, he can't represent as powerful of a spirit as Goku can.
Well, and to say, I don't know if I want to say that it's not meant necessarily as powerful as a spirit, as much as it is that Goku is kind of abandoning the.
Or I could say maybe not as true of a spirit. It's hard to really.
Well, is it?
pin
It's not
down.
necessarily they're really in conflict here, right? Because what is Roshi appealing to when he tells him that's an order? But what was represented by Krillin, who's now dead,
Right.
and it's
And
symbolic.
that tie has been severed, like we were talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wouldn't really say it's like their spirits clashing. It's Goku, and this is something.
Well, I wasn't really implying a clash of spirits, let's say, but I'm saying that the spirit that is going to support the world in the face of true malice being manifest in the world again is something that has to be defended by a new generation rather than the older generation.
But I mean,
right.
we'll wait for this.
We'll get to that, right? But that's what I'm saying with that sort of like Goku represents a higher level.
Right, but Goku's abandonment of that, because this is clearly something that he should not do.
Right. In this instance, he's lost, right? He's blinded in a sense.
Well, he is, let's say, consumed by malice. It would be malice, right?
Right. He orients himself specifically in the direction of whoever did it.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't wait to try to figure out why. All he says is, Bulma, give me the radar.
And so, I mean, obviously, Goku knows, like, killing this monster is not going to bring Krillin back.
But he knows it's a good thing to do and it's righteous, right? He's got a righteous anger against it.
He does. Yeah, his anger is founded from a place of good intention, but it's still malice. He
Yeah.
wishes to kill this thing,
I think that's
whatever
where
it is.
people confuse the idea of malice and evil, right?
Yeah.
Because there can be a like a righteous anger is a malicious intent, but it's oriented towards something that's not necessarily evil, at least by your own definition of good and evil, right?
Hmm. And so him running off too, it shows a lot too of how different Goku is from. I don't want to say that actually. Don't want to cause a firestorm. But I will say, like, Goku's inability to control himself here, and his desire for revenge, and his, let's say, and we're gonna see in a second some more symbolic indications of this, but his ability to be consumed by the shadow in this moment, and use those negative aspects of being to forward his goals, and even he can even still ride the Nimbus at the time, right? It's not to say that because he's using the shadow in this way to maliciously bludgeon the thing that has killed his friend, that doesn't make him evil.
Right. That is it's an aspect of being, right? There is that orderly aspect of what it means to be human and also the chaotic. And so there's this you can integrate the shadow in a pure way, right? The shadow there's this really Western dichotomy that comes from like the white and the black, or the light and the darkness that equates to good and evil, which I just think is very one dimensional thinking, you know. Whereas in Eastern mythology there isn't an evil categorical indicator whenever we talk about the chaotic or the unknown, right?
It just is,
It just
exactly.
it's undefined, right? And so you have a connection of like, has the divine logo sorted it out or has it not, right?
Mhm.
And so you have this cosmogonic view that's not based on being unknown isn't an evil state, right? But there's something beyond that could be considered to be evil, right? And so whenever someone like Goku encounters that evil, he can have a righteous indignation, right? Like he can have malice that's oriented toward good towards that because he's encountered something that's not
Uh-huh.
just chaotic, but actually evil,
Malevolent.
a different degree, right? Or a different
Malevolent, yeah, yeah.
dimension.
And so, I just want to wrap up this part by saying that Krillin has to die here, and Death has to be reintroduced to the world because of it. It's not a fall from paradise, let's say, because we've already seen that transpire in the first couple of episodes, to be honest. But this is more along the lines of um it's not the death of God, but like the passing of a king who has no heirs, right? And we see, and it's like you were saying, who can carry the mantle of the world now that Roshi has stepped down. And the whole point and the whole thing of Roshi stepping down, right? That creates the next thing for Goku. And what does Goku need to do next? What does the self do once the spiritual father is no longer able to sustain, or let's say nourish, in a way that propagates the self forward? Where does one go from there?
It's interesting you say that because specifically what Goku does is he immediately runs to Bulma and says, "Give me the dragon radar." Right? And so the first thing that he does is he orients himself in the pattern that he knows will guide him towards a wisdom, because right now he's in the chaotic, like he doesn't have a direction because he's lost this orientation. He can't orient himself toward a master because that master is sort of removed from the equation here. And so he has to go completely into the wild, be
But it's
lost
not.
again.
No, no. See, I don't know if I agree with that, because I think what Goku does here is wrong. Is the wrong choice. He makes the wrong choice here.
Well, obviously, yeah.
And so it's not necessarily he needs to go out into the wisdom. It's that he's going out to confront unknowns that can be better prepared for, right? Or let's say he's going out to fight a malevolence he doesn't understand. a better way to say it. And with
Right.
with Roshi's, like, even in the next set of clips we see with Roshi's explanation there,
Well,
that
that's
would
the
be.
dimension I guess I'm trying to establish, is that what he's doing isn't bad, but it's still wrong. Right? He's oriented
I mean, it
toward
is
good
bad though. Oh, what do you?
because he's enacting this. It's misguided, right? It's wrong, but he is acting rightfully, right? Like there's this sort of
No, no,
thing
yeah,
that's happening
the
where we're
nuance
adding a
there,
new
yeah.
nuance to the
Mm-hmm.
story. And so we have to establish what's wrong about what Goku's doing here, other than, like, he's learned so far that this is what you do, especially in his encounter with, like, the Red Ribbon Army, right? That this is a way that you resolve something like this. If you have an indignant, righteous response to injustices being done by an evil, I mean, this is the most unjust thing that he's come across, right? And so
Right, but
he's enacting that.
the last time he's not following that, because the last time that this happened was with Tao. And what did he do with Tao? Did he like go and find Tao in the city and like try to fight Tao there?
No, but he went after the Red Ribbon Army in their home, right?
Well, that was later. But I'm saying, like,
As a result of
when
Tao,
he was
yeah.
confronted with Malice, right? Being Tao,
Right.
and it knocked him on his ass. What did he do?
He ascended the Axis Mundi.
Right. He subordinated himself to.
Right. And in this instance, he's deliberately not doing that. He's not
Exactly.
listening to Roshi.
That's what I'm
right?
saying.
But the thing is, it's Roshi's fault because Roshi stepped down.
I don't know if
I
it's,
think
I don't know if it's Roshi's.
I think he set the cosmic
fault.
stage for Goku not to listen to him by fundamentally not being, because that's what he says whenever he's done, is he's sort of like, we'll see this later on, but this is really his way to be like, I'm going into retirement, you know? And there's this interesting thing about it where it's like he's handing off the weight of the world to his students to take it on, and he's stepping out of the picture. So now it's like death resets the scales, and then it's
No,
like,
yeah,
you're not my
yeah.
master here anymore,
Right, but I don't know. I wouldn't say it's Roshi's fault, because Goku's been shown that there's the spirit of it, and Korin is still a master that he can subordinate himself to. Right, as
Mhm.
far as we know, Korin is stronger than Goku.
Right. In a more literal sense, Goku should still listen to Roshi because
Because
know,
he represents more than just Roshi.
he represents more than his physical manifestation.
He's like,
in the
yeah,
hierarchy.
you're
Yeah.
not my master anymore.
But that's not something he understands.
all masters.
Yeah.
It is something. I think it's something Goku understands, but he intentionally doesn't listen to here, because he's acting in being possessed, let's say, by the spirit of revenge. And so
Right.
that whole point in his
Being-
adoption of that shadow aspect of himself is what leads him on this path to go do what he's about to do.
Yeah, and I think that sets up a longer storyline as to what's going to be the final instance of Goku's integration of his tail, right? And so it sets up here that
We have to see it here.
we have to see the resolution of Goku not doing this again, right?
Yes.
So this, I do agree with you in that sense, that especially it's Goku's wildness and his tail here that allows him to be, I don't want to say seduced by his passions, but he's controlled by his emotionality, right? He loses that logic, or his logos, his connection to that more logical thinking, and as a result ends up in chaos, right?
And that's why Roshi says that he's weak, is because by acting in this way, he's lost his ability to create order out of chaos.
But what's
and
so beautiful,
if you notice later on when he has his fight, he's not able to use the Kamehameha wave, but we'll get to that.
But yeah, what's so beautiful about that is that had Goku eaten, let's say,
Had he been
he may
nourished.
be able to be nourished enough to take on a challenge like this, but Roshi knows that because he hasn't been nourished, he can't. And the reason he hasn't been nourished is because of that more cosmic idea we talked about, which is that
the interruption of the cosmic world caused by
right.
the
What stopped
stepping
Goku
down
from
of
being
the
able to eat after
brother.
the match was the absence of Krillin. Krillin being a symbolic connection between him and Roshi is not able to be the person to feed him, right? Because he agreed to pay the prize money to the restaurant, and he didn't get it because he stepped down from the tournament, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it all kind of
Well, I mean
paints this nice
that's
like
not really
picture.
brought up in the plot, but yeah, I
Right.
mean that's I see what you're saying. Spiritually, that's the pattern that it follows. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I was wanting to talk about originally when I mentioned him not being able to pay for
Hmm.
and betting the entire prize money on it, was that we knew inevitably we were going to be here and he wasn't going to be able to be the one to nourish Goku, right?
Um, right, and it's also to say that Goku's relationship with Tien, the rivalry, is not the same kind of nourishment that the self is supposed to attain by the seeking out of the wisdom of the spiritual father. Now, that whole aspect of it, and it's kind of the idea, and the why Krillin has to die is because Goku no longer having Master Roshi as the pinnacle has leveled his world such that his relationship towards Master Roshi needs to be redefined, and by redefining it, it's killed Krillin in his current state. And so the next time we see Krillin, he's going to be a bit different. Well, not the next time because we'll see him revive, but then the next time after that, it's going to be,
Definitely,
you
yeah.
know. And so, um, right, I think we're ready to move on.
Yeah.
Good, good, good. That was a 19-minute on the first one. So, Oolong finds a piece of paper left on the floor with a demon symbol on it. Roshi drops his staff in disbelief, telling the gang that it is the symbol of Piccolo Daimo. Tien recognizes this name as somebody who once brought the world to the depths of terror. Roshi then recalls the events surrounding the rise of Piccolo Daimo. He tells of a time where demons swarmed and laid waste to civilization. He tells them about himself and the Crane Hermit working together to fend them off, only to be laid low by Piccolo himself. Even their master, Mutaito Sama, was easily defeated by the Demon King. In response, Mutaito departed on a journey, saying that he would return without fail. Roshi tells him that this was the moment that the Crane Hermit set foot down the path of evil, realizing the futility of righteousness. In Muchaito's absence, Piccolo Daimo terrorized the world, forcing Roshi into the mountains. Eventually, Muchaito returned and sealed Piccolo in a container with the Mafuba technique, sacrificing himself in the process. Roshi then dropped the Denshi jar to the bottom of the ocean to prevent his return. When Chaozu asks if Crane Hermit could have released him, Roshi says that it's unthinkable since Crane Hermit knows the reality of Piccolo Daimo. And that's actually very important, that last sentence.
Yeah.
So let's start at the beginning here. The demon symbol. So the demon symbol is kind of the opposite idea of the anonymity that is sought by actual heroes, let's say, like why heroes have secret identities to begin with.
It's the antithesis of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the antithesis. It's
It's
taking
leaving
credit
the
for
calling card
leaving the calling card to receive credit for things.
that are
Uh,
bad.
yeah, and so um, Piccolo, and we'll get into more of Piccolo's character once we see him later on. But this is the first iteration of what we get about his character, and we can already see that he himself is um at least arrogant. We don't know about deceitful yet. We don't know about resentful yet, but we know he's arrogant. He's fulfilled one already before we even see him of these the check boxes for the unholy, let's say. And so Tien even recognizes his name. Now and then we get the events of the rise of Piccolo Daimo and how the world was ruled by terror, right? And so we're finally getting well, and here's the thing, because the way Dragon Ball works and how Piccolo's actual backstory is revealed way later, we're gonna skip that for now. But
For a minute.
for a minute. But it's important to know that his backstory, as listeners probably, if you're Dragon Ball fans, you probably know what we're talking about with Piccolo. We haven't even mentioned Kami, and we won't really mention him.
Yeah, there's a cosmic element.
Right. And so but I do want to say that the rule by terror, right? This is an idea, the chaotic rule or the despotic rule of a king, because he is still a king, right? Taking over the lands, um, and ruling by fear. It's almost to say, and even that they destroy civilization. It's almost to say that that King Piccolo is a force that destroys, undoes being itself. And that's kind of what a demon, right? A demon has adopted that mode of being as well. Because what is a demon? Demons traditionally, right, are supposed to be
Manifestations of unholiness or of evil, right?
right. Well, and what I was, well, yes, I would say yes.
They're anti-being in their manifestation, right?
Well, let's say who is the demon in, let's say, Western mythology,
The demon is Satan or Lucifer, right?
right? The, and so
When there's a Luciferian element, especially to Piccolo Daimao, right?
right, and we're gonna get to that, especially with some of the stuff
Mm-hmm.
attacks he uses and things like that. But before we do, Lucifer led a rebellion of angels, right? And those angels became demons, that fallen angels,
Right,
right?
fallen angels.
And so, um, these demons have adopted this anti-being stance under Piccolo Daimao, under the rule of Piccolo, which is ordained by him, let's say, as a king. Uh, had brought about this like reign of terror in the world for ages. I don't even know. It doesn't really tell us how long, but it's assumed that it's a good long while. And we also see that Crane Hermit and Roshi and how they interacted long ago, or they fought against Piccolo long ago. Now, Piccolo's rule of the earth isn't really explained too much here. All we know is that he sends out demons to destroy and like lay waste to the land, right? And this is to say that his mode of being is one that is so powerful it can proliferate onto other and create other demons to do his bidding.
Well, I think that's important because Mutaito asks him why he's doing what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that it is specifically to discourage people from becoming heroes, to challenge him.
Right, exactly.
And that is that
is
nihilistic drive or that demoralizing force that you're talking about that propagates itself
mm-hmm.
and creates more demons out of it, more fallen angels, or more turned potential,
yes.
right?
It's that
Against being rather
demoralization,
than for being.
proliferation of demoralization and the absence of value, right? To say that this doesn't actually matter. And so what is the world, why wouldn't it be that the world needs to burn? And this is taking that the idea that Tien first thought he wanted to be to a degree that's far beyond that. It's beyond what Tao has wanted as well. Tao didn't want to burn the world, he just wanted money, right? But this is to where it takes it to where the malice inflicted by Tao is manifest here in an entire being in Piccolo that wants to spread malice throughout the world. And that idea and the demoralization of it that spreads to regular people are those demons that exist around us that say, don't do the right thing.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Do the wrong thing.
It's to point out
feels
futility.
good to do
right.
the wrong thing.
Well, the futility aspect of it is what
And that's what
Roshi
we're gonna
pointed out
get.
about Crane Hermit, right?
Yeah, we're about to get there. So they fight with the demons, and Roshi and Crane Hermit lose, and Mutaito loses as well, even though that's their master. And so we can see Mutaito is a superordinate spiritual father, right? He's almost
Okay.
oh,
Well, go ahead with what you're saying. But
he is what do I want to say? Pre-cosmogonic spiritual father.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I would agree with that. And so here's the thing that Piccolo Daimao does, though, is the reason that he's called Piccolo is in the first thing he really does in the story is he tells him to dance for him as he dies. And what he's doing is he's enacting terror as a game.
Mm.
He's
weaponized the gamification of the world into evil.
Right, and the way that he's done that is to to make a game out of killing the hero or killing the spiritual father. So what he's doing is similar to what Tien tried to do to defeat Goku, where he turned him into a game and used his volleyball attack. This is taking that all the way to the extreme. So far, that is pure demoralization, to trivialize no matter how heroic you are.
It's even
which
less
is to
of
say,
a game.
to
right?
dance for me, right? To make a... And there's also that when I think of the Piccolo and the dance for me as you die, and he does that to multiple characters, right? Where he wants it to be, he could kill them outright, but instead he's always firing these beams, like grazing them and making them sort of react
beams
to him.
of light bringing beams, let's say, right?
But not killing them, but rather making them dance to his tune, right? Making them
and that's
react
why
to
they're
him.
all instruments, right?
Yeah.
Is because he is an ordinance spirit that knows how to play the evil melody of life.
Right. Or it's like the Pied Piper, right?
Kind
So
of. But
there's
the
this
Pied Piper,
idea
but the Pied Piper was wrong. That's why he lures all the children out. They didn't want to pay him for taking the
Right.
rats away.
Well, anyway, taking the children away is to demoralize a culture, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
and that's why
to turn away from good, to
and
turn
that's
them
why
bad.
it's the ultimate
Yeah.
thing that he can do, because they say the whole reason the town says like we're not going to pay him for getting rid of the rats is because they say he's powerless against us. Like, we have walls, we have arrows, whatever. Right?
Yeah, and then it comes from
and it
within.
was like, no, the actual power is this influence, right?
Yeah.
And so, right, I see.
But that's what demoralization does.
The
right?
influence, right?
Yeah. And so there is that element of him where he is. They called him charming. I think in the first couple of lines they said he was charming but horrible, or something along those lines. And that's the devil, right? He's charming, right? He plays a sweet tune, but also that tune is a tune of demoralization towards the spiritual father and towards goodness
And value.
Right?
Yeah.
And meaning, right?
And meaning, yeah. And so all of this transpires, and we see that the superordinate father here, who is Mutaito, being brought low, and not killed. And that's the thing too. Piccolo is so brilliant because, I mean, it comes to bite him in the ass. But that's what the devil would do, is to keep someone alive, to demoralize them even more. Like,
there's no purpose to doing what
he's
doing if there isn't an ultimate person to demoralize.
So
right?
far beneath me that I don't even need to kill you. Right.
Precisely, but it's sort of like if there was nobody there, then there would be no purpose for him.
Yeah.
You know? So he has to preserve some ideal purity to keep trying to demoralize him.
Kind of, because his
like
goals,
the Joker in Batman, where it's sort of like
of.
he needs to have someone to demoralize, right?
And that'll see, that's the thing. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
We'll leave it at that, because there is something about his origins, let's say, that we can get into there. But this eventually is what causes Crane to realize the futility of righteousness and the power of the malicious path that he can clearly see before him. And it's interesting too, because if you think about it lineally, right, this malice is what taught Crane Hermit malice, which was in turn what taught Tao malice, which was what in turn killed the spirit of the father in the western lands where Goku found Upa.
So this is where I want to sort of tie this in.
But it's all getting compounding right now. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I want to tie this in also to the Inoshikacho saga. Inochikacho. Inoshikacho. The situation where there was a time which I don't think we can really take it as literal canon, but in the story of that episode, Roshi and the Crane Hermit were up in the mountains and they found a beast called Inoshikacho, who, whenever it was angered, it couldn't be controlled, right? And so they departed from each other, and whenever they did, the Crane Hermit took Inoshikacho with him. And when we see Tien, he's traveling around with Inoshikacho and being manipulative and using goodness for his own gain, right? And so there is this demoralization that I think that Inoshikacho is sprung out of, that the realization that there's sort of a more worldly application of quote-unquote goodness, that if you're not oriented towards an elevated mode of being, you can just essentially use that that chip on your shoulder, or sort of um that nihilistic sort of urge to say that there's a futility in righteousness, so you should just use it for your own personal gain, right?
Hmm.
And
Okay.
so I think that mountain, they're up in the mountain and they find that it's similar to that idea where it's like, well, Roshi was driven into the mountains after this happened. We don't know what happened with the crane hermit. But it's kind of that's the symbolic split between Roshi and crane hermit, right?
Is what does one do when one is confronted with the weakness of the father,
Exactly. Do you be resentful towards it?
or do you have faith in it? And so those are your two options. And what I was getting at with the lineal path down that you see this malice follow, right,
Mm-hmm.
is that um ultimately that's what sets in motion everything is Tao. And it all goes back to Tao and Goku, right? Because we
And
see,
Tien's emulation of Tao.
I mean, that's involved with it. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Because Crane teaches Tao, Tao teaches Tien, Tien fights Goku, and that's that real first interaction with Malice that Goku has. And by interacting with that, right, what does he do but kill the spirit of the father? Which, what does this first Malice do that we see but kill the spirit of the father for Crane Hermit?
Right. Yeah.
And so it follows down. And so the very first thing that we see Goku do after that is he does not what Roshi does. He takes it a step further from what Roshi does. And instead of having faith, only having faith in the spirit of the father, he works actively to redeem it. And by doing so, he defeats death and brings back Upa's father.
Because that is the thing that allows it to happen.
Right, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is it's so.
And that's the dichotomy between them that we see resolved with the Kamehameha wave
Mm-hmm.
during the tournament, which is that the crane hermit is resentful toward Roshi for his mode of being, claiming that what he would be doing would be for his own gain, but in reality what he was doing was for the spirit of the thing itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the crane hermit revealed himself to be self-serving, sacrificing even his students for his own narcissistic sort of worship of himself as a sort of spiritual father, right? And that's that worship of the self that sort of kind of gets integrated whenever you turn away from the elevated view, right? And so when that's revealed with the truth of how those two spirits line up,
Mm-hmm.
then he's
How
sort of
those two
cast
paths ultimately
back into the, into
Yeah.
exile essentially.
Mm-hmm. How those two paths ultimately end up, right? And so,
But yeah, I think that's a manifestation of
Mhm.
that same thing, right? With that resentful nature versus, because I do think that there's that. I want to call it resentful, but it's really sort of a. It's almost more spiteful, you know. Like resentful is a way to put it,
I think resentful is worse.
but I don't
Maybe
even know if I would
spiteful.
call it. It seems to be more because it's not necessarily working to undo the spirit of the father as much as it is to just operate.
Piccolo?
No, I'm talking about the crane hermit.
Oh, yeah, yeah, okay.
Right.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing. Since it's the antithetical spiritual father, it's not
It's more of
it's
like
not
the
trying to kill.
self-serving.
It's not trying to kill the spiritual the father, the
Yeah.
spiritual
It's
father,
trying
right?
to
It's trying
utilize
to
it for the self
pervert
essentially.
it.
Yeah.
Pervert the idea of the spiritual father. And so Crane Hermit thinks that his way is the best, his perverted way of the spiritual father,
Which
which
is completely
instead of
irrelevant in the face of Piccolo, right? And he's just his way
Mhm.
of thinking
I
kind
see
of
what you're
goes
saying,
out the
yeah.
window because it gets superseded completely.
And to say that, right, like, because what is the spiritual father supposed to do for those students but when they're in their darkest times reveal their weakness and who they could be, which is the answer to their problem? Whereas it's kind of, and this is what I mean by perverted with Crane Hermit, is that when his students are at their lowest, he doesn't reveal who they could be, but reveals who he thinks they should be. And so that's kind of where that injection of the ego into the spiritual course of the what the process is supposed to be corrupts it and perverts it and
Right.
makes it
And that comes from that
weaker.
self-centeredness or that worship of the self rather than sort of as
and that
Thinking of
all
yourself as a tool.
and that to go
Yeah.
back to this, it stems from his disrespect of the spirit of the father because of what he's encountered in with Piccolo to bring it all back.
Right. He's always interpreted it to be a signifier
So
of
we
the
went down and then we
arbitrary,
went back
yeah,
up. Yeah.
of the arbitrariness of all of what the teaching was that he was receiving from Utaito, which we should say specifically is spiritual teaching.
And how powerful malice is instantiated in the world, right? Because how powerful Piccolo is as a spirit that has taken games and taken, let's say, the hierarchies of the world and turned them into um or used them for evil means, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
He's perverted them as well, and it's like taking what Crane knows he's doing to be bad and making it in a character who knows what he's doing is bad and does it on purpose. And so we see the next evolution. And that's kind of why and that's why I really like the early seasons here, because it's not just the next strong guy will be the next villain. Here's the next strong guy.
Oh, there's a definite logical progression.
Here's the
in
next
these.
Jiren, right?
Yeah.
So, in the last thing, so we talked about Crane Hermit. Mutaito eventually does return after leaving, and Roshi, I almost said Goku. Roshi keeps the faith and waits for him. And when he finally does return, he uses a mysterious technique called the Mafuba, which I'm going to talk about more later when we see it in the show. I think it's going to be more pertinent at that time.
Mm-hmm. Suffice to say, there's a technique that this lower primordial spiritual father could sacrifice himself to lock away the Demon King.
Yes, and it's almost it's similar, and we'll talk about it. It's similar because, well, we'll talk about it because we've seen Roshi do some acts like this already.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what is Roshi but essentially teaching these magic words from the get-go?
Mm-hmm. And so when he returns and locks him away, he sacrifices himself, and Roshi does the final thing, and that is to take the idea of evil for its own sake and cast it into the unknown, right?
Drops it to the bottom of the ocean.
To not be known by people.
Right. The idea is sealed inside of a vessel, and that vessel is hidden in the darkest part of the unknown.
Right. And so to seal him away in the unknown is to say that Mutaito's sacrifice was not in vain, let's say. And so the last thing we see in this little section is Chaozu asking if Crane Hermit could have released him, and Roshi rebukes him, saying that no, even Crane Hermit knows what that would entail. And that that really means that Crane Hermit understands the undoing of being itself is not his goal. The perverting of the spiritual father is one thing, but the undoing of being itself is not.
Right. To be against the spirit of the father and to be against being are two different things.
It's a different level of evil hierarchy, if you will. And so we're on to our last little set here, where it's finally revealed. Here he is, old Alo. And so Piccolo runs. Goku runs.
He's just
Piccolo
sprinting.
does not run. Piccolo, I don't think, ever runs in this. Meanwhile, Goku runs until he hits the edge of the cliff before realizing he's forgotten about the Nimbus cloud. He then takes to the sky in pursuit of the moving Dragon Ball on Bulma's radar. Elsewhere in the airship, an old Piccolo Daimyo is told about the Earth Dragon Balls by Pilaf and the homies. When Pilaf asks if Piccolo's wish would be to dominate the world, he laughs, saying that world domination would be easy enough. The true wish would be for eternal youth, so that he could reign for all eternity. Pilaf tries unsuccessfully to negotiate for a share of the world in Piccolo's new order, and when asked why he has his servant Tamarine seal the rosters, Piccolo tells Pilaf that the martial artists were the ones that sealed him away long ago. Meanwhile, back at the ring, Roshi realizes that this same fact, that Piccolo must be using the rosters to hunt down everyone who could challenge him out of fear of the Mafuba. This is Pilaf's ultimate. This is it. This is what he was put in Dragon Ball in the beginning, And was his ultimate conclusion always.
Right. The
It always
ultimate
is.
foolish act. Right.
The ultimate foolish act that's so foolish that even adversarial spirits know not to do it, right?
Yes.
It's so unholy. But Pilaf, the last thing we saw with Pilaf is that he fought Goku thinking that he knew his weakness. His tail wasn't there. Goku steals Shu's clothes, embarrasses them, right? And Pilaf has, to him, no other choice but to go seek this unknown terror and release it on the world. But obviously, that's a foolish plan to begin with, because as we see in this little section, he's trying to negotiate with a terrorist, more or less, or with a despot. It's not something that he can actually negotiate with. Pilaf has his understanding of evil is so immature that he thought that real evil can be negotiated with, bartered with, reasoned with, but that's not
He's
necessarily the
so
case.
foolish that after his last defeat at the hands of Goku, knowing Goku to be good, thought himself to be a villain and sought out a stronger villain in his eyes,
Mm-hmm.
thinking, I'm really a villain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he actually found a villain, something that was antithetical to being.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And the reason he sought him out is because he knew that what he was doing was wrong. And so he sought out something known to be bad or evil or against the good to be allied with him, because it's the only thing he could think of to stop Goku from stopping him from getting away with doing things he knew were wrong. Right? And that's an aspect of Pilaf's character, is that
Well,
he brings the harm down on himself because he knows what he's doing is wrong, and
he
so he's
does.
constantly paying the price.
That's true, and it's comedic in a way, but this is also to say that we've moved on to a point in the world where the stakes have been raised, and the foolish adversary actions, instead of just, let's say, in the beginning causing Goku to, let's say, fully embrace the shadow and become the Uzaru spirit, or even when he has the flying fortress. Instead of those things, this time it's actually real. This time there's actually a threat, and it's because now the spiritual father has been taken out of that protector role in the world.
And the ring is the world now. The
The
ring
ring
has
is the
been
world, yeah.
erased.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever he goes into chaos to find the strongest malice he can conjure up, what he finds is the real deal this time.
Is
Instead
real
of it being a
malice.
game,
Yeah.
right?
There's
He
no
actually
yeah.
brings the most malicious thing that the world could handle up, and not the most malicious that his game could come up with would be manifest, right? And so he goes beyond himself because the limiter has been taken away.
Yes, exactly. That whole idea of being in the mushroom desert is no longer applicable. Now he's
Right.
soaring in the air, right? And it's beyond that land. And and so the last thing they talk about is how Piccolo is going to hunt down all of the martial artists. And martial artists here, if we want to say art is a pathway to seek and subordinate oneself to truth, then the martial artist is just doing that martially, let's say. And so when Goku acts these things out, and when Piccolo says these things, right, we've seen these spirits of these martial artists before, like Nam, who are let's say benevolent forces in the world trying to better their situation. And that idea itself is too much and can inspire too much goodness in the world for Piccolo to allow them to continue to exist.
Precisely. And so we've come full circle now, talking about what Piccolo wants, which is the demoralization of the heroic spirit.
Yes.
It is
Well,
antithetical to
the
being.
complete destruction of that which inspires the heroic spirit.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to prevent the heroic spirit from beginning to exist, right? From beginning to progress towards, because the heroic spirit is always in a progress of becoming stronger. He wants
Right.
to delete the aspect of reality that people
Before,
can use to want to be stronger in the first
because
place.
it's a reciprocal process. Because if the things that inspire the hero are there, then the hero can then raise the level of the human spirit and
And
improve the
participate in that
quality of that.
process. Yeah.
Right. And so Piccolo's removing one of those steps and saying
Yeah.
that the inspiration for this and the seeking of truth will be something that will be persecuted and eradicated.
And that's exactly what he does.
Right. And we're gonna see that next episode. So Goku here at the very end catches up, and we're gonna see how that unfolds. It's a very interesting fight. It's not like any we've ever seen in Dragon Ball as of yet. But I think this is a good place to stop.
I like it.
We've been going for 50 minutes, yeah.
I like leading in to see, why did Roshi say Goku was being a fool? We'll see immediately in the next episode, right?
Yes. And why I kept iterating like what
Mhm.
he's doing is not the
Yeah.
right choice.
Right.
And we'll get to talk more about Piccolo later on, and specifically towards the end of this, which is so weird about Dragon Ball. I say weird, it makes sense, but like how we're gonna not learn this about Piccolo until way later, and how we're
Right.
not gonna be able to talk about it way later. But it's still set up now, and it's something that, like, when I could have been talking about this lineal path of malice when we were at Tao. But I
Right.
think it was better to save it to this point, because this is where we really see how it all has tied back together and how
Well,
these
yeah, the
sins
saga paints
of
a
the
picture,
father.
because you have to have all of you need to have the context to understand just what the weight of what is happening here,
Right,
right?
exactly.
And so I do think that it's spelled out really nicely.
But just hang with us. We are gonna get to some things that if you're wanting to type out in the comments or in the chat, like, hey, Piccolo is Kami's brother, basically. And
Oh, we're
so
getting to it.
we'll get to it.
We have to work up to it, though.
Yeah, and obviously he's not his brother, but I was just trolling, if
They
you
were
will.
just old childhood friends.
They're old buddies. So I think that's a good place to stop then.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, if you enjoyed what you heard, please give us a like, subscribe. We upload new episodes Mondays and Thursdays to YouTube, Tuesdays and Fridays to Rumble. Give us a subscribe over there, if you would, please. We'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments or in the chat, so be sure to leave those words for us to read. We'd love to read your words. Other than that, this was episode 102 of Dragon Ball, Enter King Piccolo, or The Death of Krillin. I'm your host on the left, Owl,
I'm your host on the right, Brock.
and we hope you guys have a good night.